Before the first candle was lit each morning, the smell was already there. Not roses, not cedar, not the expensive amber perfume imported from across the sea. Something older, something human. The greatest courts in history, draped in velvet, gilded in gold, staffed by hundreds, carried a smell that no amount of money could fully erase. And the people who lived inside them had learned, over generations, not to notice. This is what a single day at court actually looked. We tend to imagine royal courts as places of impossible beauty, towering ceilings, candlelight on marble, powdered wigs and silk gowns, music drifting down long corridors, and that image is not entirely wrong. But it is incomplete, because those same corridors were shared with hundreds of human bodies who rarely bathed. The same marble floors were scrubbed by servants who slept in basement rooms without ventilation. The same candlelight flickered over chamber pots that were sometimes emptied into courtyards just outside the dining hall windows. Elite courts, whether in Europe or reflected in the earliest American colonial power structures, were functioning cities compressed into single buildings. And like all cities, they produced waste, disease, and smell on an industrial scale. Morning dawn at court began not with birdsong but with footsteps. Servants rose before light. Fires needed building. Water needed carrying. Chamber pots from the night before needed emptying, and in a palace housing several hundred people, that was not a small task. The wealthiest residents did not bathe in the modern sense. Bathing was considered medically dangerous by many in earlier centuries. It was believed that water opened the pores to disease. Instead, cleanliness meant the appearance of cleanliness. Clean linen pressed against the skin, powder dusted onto hair and sometimes skin, a few drops of costly perfume applied to the wrists, the neck, behind the ears. The morning ritual for a high-ranking courtier might take 2 hours, not because they were washing, but because they were constructing. Constructing the image of a clean, composed, powerful person. Meanwhile, the servants who dressed them had no such rituals. They worked, they sweated, they shared sleeping quarters with 4 or 8 other bodies. They had access to the same building, the same air, the same stone walls that absorbed everything. By mid-morning, the public rooms were filling, and the smell was already layered. Wood smoke from fireplaces, candle wax. Cooked meat from the kitchens below. The particular heaviness of unwashed bodies in wool and silk pressed together. Animal smells from horses stabled nearby. And beneath it all, the permanent damp of old stone that had soaked up decades of human life. The afternoon was when the performance reached its peak. Court was not simply where powerful people lived, it was where they competed. Every gesture, every position in a room, every proximity to the monarch carried meaning, and in that environment, personal presentation became political survival. Perfume served a second purpose here, not just to mask, but to signal. Certain scents were expensive enough to function as status markers: ambergris, civet, rose attar. If you smelled like these things, you had money, connections, and access. If you didn't, everyone in the room knew it. Courtiers learned to identify each other partly by smell. A visiting diplomat could be assessed within seconds of entering a room. Even the monarch's own body odor, and historical records make clear that many famous rulers had notable ones, was something courtiers were expected to endure in silence, and sometimes even compliment. There are documented accounts of chambers so thick with combined perfume, smoke, and body heat that visitors felt physically ill within minutes. But leaving early was a social catastrophe. You stayed, you smiled. You pretended not to notice. The palace kitchens, running all day, pushed smoke and grease upward through the building. Animals, dogs were common in court settings, sometimes dozens of them, contributed their own presence to the air. In warmer months, flies were simply part of the environment. And beneath the gilded furniture, in the cracks of ancient floorboards, in the heavy tapestries that were almost never cleaned, everything accumulated. Here is the thing that is easy to miss. The people inside these courts did not experience this as squalor. They experienced it as normal. Human beings adapt to the environment they are born into with remarkable efficiency. The smell of the court was simply the smell of power, of home, of daily life. It was as invisible to those inside it as the air itself. What strikes us as shocking was, to them, unremarkable. And that is perhaps the most historically important point of all, not that they were dirty by our standards, but that every era lives inside its own version of normal. The systems, the habits, the blind spots that feel natural in any given time are often only visible in hindsight. The courtiers who spent their lives inside perfumed, reeking palaces believed they were living at the height of civilization. Candles were snuffed at the end of each court day. The fires burned low. The servants disappeared into their quarters below stairs. The great rooms fell quiet, and the smell remained, soaked into the walls, into the curtains. into the wooden floors polished 1,000 times, into the very idea of what power looked like and what it cost to be near it. Perfume was never a solution. It was a layer, one thin, fragrant layer over a reality that no amount of wealth or ceremony could fully cover. The courts are gone now, but the human tendency to dress up the uncomfortable